Greetings, everybody. I'm Jeremiah.
That's him.
She's Vania.
That's me. Welcome to another episode of the Beard and Curls podcast, where culture and creativity meets consciousness.
And if you're new here, consider subscribing to our YouTube channel or follow us on your favorite platform for the latest, most exciting conversations anywhere.
You ready?
I'm ready. Cue that intro.
What's up, guys? It's your girl Margot Bingham.
Karen Parsons.
You're now tuned in.
You're now tuned in.
You are now tuned in.
You are now tuned in
to Beard and Curls.
Beard and Curls.
Beard and Curls.
Beard and Curls.
Beard and Curls. Keep it locked.
Today's guest is a therapist, writer, and podcast host with her own private practice in Atlanta, Georgia.
As the host of the Still Becoming podcast, she helps people become free to be who they were made to be. We're talking about none other than Monica DiCristina.
Monica, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Awesome. So let's jump right into it. So you're a licensed professional counselor. So tell me a little bit about your journey to becoming a therapist.
Well, the reason I became a therapist is really my own personal journey. You know, that I struggled for years with anxiety to the point that it's kind of embarrassing to tell people about. You know, it's not something that I wanted to talk about. And this went on for years and years, and I tried everything I could find, any book I could read, any memorizing scripture, any even self-help group. I went to everything, but it wasn't until I finally went to see a psychologist, actually, that I found the help I needed. And I was terrified to do that. I was so nervous that he would look at me and say, like, all your worst fears are true. You know, there's something wrong with you. But really, it was pretty simple, CBT. And he went in there and he kind of helped me identify that this is what happened in your life. And this is why you're struggling with what you're struggling. And this is your way out. And once he put all that together, the story I was telling myself, the shame story, just started to unravel. And I thought if I could do anything in my life, it would be to help someone else have that same experience, to have their shame story unravel and find some freedom. So that's why I became a therapist.
Wow. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. I wanted to ask you a follow-up to something you said. So in the period between you getting help, how long was that actually?
It was about 10 years. So it was a long time. You know, some of that time I was an adolescent, some of that I was a college student. But yeah, it was a good many years that I, you know, found myself a little bit hiding too, because, you know, you're living this life and you're struggling inside. And that's one of the reasons I'm so passionate about talking about these things, is because, you know, I think if I had heard someone say, hey, it's okay, you're not the only one, it would have made such a difference.
Mm-hmm. And were you able to share your struggles with some people, or was it something that you kept for yourself?
It's a great question. And I did. I shared it with my parents, and, you know, they were like, whoa. I mean, they love me, but they didn't know what was happening. Mm-hmm. I shared it with some close friends, and they thought, we don't know what to do with this either. And then I was the person who, you know, would try to meet with the pastor. Mm-hmm. I was the person who would, you know, if there was a prayer offering, I'd be like, oh, I think I need some, you know, but no one knew what to do with me. You know, everyone was like, you know, sorry, it's so hard. No one knew what was happening because it was the wrong medicine. What I needed was CBT. What I needed was therapy and someone who had, you know, a psychodynamic understanding of therapy. But I just kept meeting really nice people who cared, you know, but then that makes you feel even more isolated, right?
Mm-hmm. I can imagine. No, I appreciate you adding that part. It's almost like people had good intentions and they were well-meaning, but they just weren't able to provide you with that added support that you needed.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And so, like, you talked a little bit about, you know, about 10 years before you decided to get help. So was that more so just not being able to just know what you needed, or was that more like a last resort? Like, what went into just saying, okay, I need to go to therapy at this point?
I think it was a combination of a number of things. It was that I didn't know that's what I needed. I just didn't have the education to know that this was an option. It was a bit of a last resort then after I tried everything, and then everything I could find. And obviously, there's more things out there. And then it was just where opportunity kind of met my need. And it was actually the father of a friend in college who was a psychologist, and he saw me for free. And which is something that I try to carry forward, is making sure that if someone comes to you, and of course we can't do that in every part of your practice, but that's a real value of mine, that trying to pay that forward, because it changed my life.
Wow, wow. So I wanted to then kind of follow up on something else you said also, as far as like the church's role. So like, obviously you talk to your pastor whenever there was something going on, you would try to, find yourself in that. And so what more can the church do as far as promoting mental health services?
I mean, and I say this, with great humility as someone who's not a church leader, right? And so I just want to say that first, that I don't know how hard that is and how complex that is. So that is not something I've ever done. But I would say that just from my own experience, just greater education about mental health issues, that not everything has the same source of healing. Not everything needs scripture or prayer, and I'm not saying that scripture and prayer can't help everything, but not everything needs that. I think better education about medications, about therapy, about different kinds of therapy, I think is just a way of, serving people that go to church. Just like we would never say to someone who had diabetes, we would never say, just, I don't know about insulin. We would never say that. We would say, this is where you can find some help. And so I think there's just the more education and the more that's just normalized, I think could be really helpful. And maybe that is happening in churches all over, it just wasn't my experience.
Okay.
Oh, that's a great point. And what else do you think can be done to normalize it even more? So besides the church example, like in general.
Yeah. Well, I think in general, just kind of like what we're doing right now, just talking about it, that a lot of times what people might have a view of is, if you're struggling with your mental health, they have maybe a certain picture of what that might look like, but just sort of breaking through that struggling with your mental health can look like 1,000 different pictures, and 1,000 different representations of that. And so I think the more that we talk about it, and I also believe as a practicing therapist, the more we talk about taking care of our own mental health, the more we sort of normalize that. It takes away that sort of hierarchy, that can happen between therapist and client, and puts us here. Like, no, I'm sitting here in this chair because I've been there, right? And it really levels the playing field and just makes it not so scary, makes it just normal. We're just humans, and we all struggle at different times. And really, we take turns, we take turns needing help. We take turns giving help. So just more talking about it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I really love that you said that, though, Monica, as far as just having been on the other side, just having that experience as being a client, and really being able to identify with our own clients to say, I've been, in that position, I've been in that seat, and now you're in a position to, give help. It's about giving help and receiving help. It's just like I mentioned it in the podcast that I did recently. Like, I like to let my clients know, like, just as I'm on this side providing you with therapy, I could easily be coming to you for something else that I need help with, and that you can maybe better help me with. And so I love that you can kind of create that equality from that standpoint.
Love that. I love that. Yep.
So you said that this experience kind of like inspired you to become a therapist. Like, did you decide that you wanted to become a therapist after you started getting therapy, or did you think about that before? So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say I was sitting at a Dunkin' Donuts with my now husband right after I had started therapy, and I was, my mind was kind of blown, and really getting help. And so it was right during it, and right when I started to feel some freedom, that I said, this is what I want to do. I mean, this is what I want to help people with.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome.
So you have a podcast called Still Becoming, right?
Yep.
So can you tell us a little bit about what it is and who is it for?
Yeah. So Still becoming is, in my mind, kind of helps represent that's never too late, and it's never too late to become who you were made to be. That I really think, like my own experience and the experience of many people I've worked with, we get bound up, but we have all these things that we're made to do in the world. And so the podcast is kind of combining interviews with people that are experts in fields or just their own stories, of becoming. And then there's meditative stories, which is my writing put to music. Like it's like kind of like adult story time. It's like allegorical, like you kind of learn a lesson through it. And then there's mental health check-ins, which is just teaching about the brain, teaching about anxiety. And so my heart behind it is just to kind of promote this idea of normalizing hope and change and your own becoming process. And I clearly love the word becoming.
I was just gonna say, Monica, I love that title, Still Becoming.
Thanks.
When I saw that, I was like, what? That is great. I love it. Awesome. So what was the process in coming up with that title, actually?
Well, truth be told, I had this idea for clearly I'm a slow mover. Okay. It took me 10 years to go to therapy. I had this idea for what would be like a blog called On Becoming. And then I realized it's too close to on being and nobody even knows what that means, And so I changed it to still because I felt like it kind of just kept the hope in there, And so the process was slow and was me, being a therapist for years and starting to write. And then it was realizing, my own becoming process, which is before I wanted to become a therapist, I wanted to be an artist. And I love art. I love expressing meaningful things in artistic ways. And so it was kind of a marriage of all that therapeutic knowledge and art kind of all together. So it was a windy path, but here we are.
No, I love it. I just think it can mean so many different things to so many different people. And I love that because I see that and I think whoa, that's very humbling that you would call it that, because as a therapist, it's like, I'm still growing, I'm still evolving. Right. Totally. And there's so many other components that, you can evolve into. So I think that's awesome.
How do you help clients who struggle to find their purpose?
Oh, gosh, that's an amazing question. And I'm sure there's 1,000 books written about it that might be more eloquent than me. But I think one of the ways is to first help them understand their own story, that things happen in our lives and we start carrying around these silent assumptions or core beliefs about ourselves. And then I like to think of it like goggles, like we see the whole world through that. So say you think I'm not good enough. Well, you're going to see the whole world through that. So finding their purpose is first unpacking what are the false things that you're carrying around. And once we start to name those and unpack those, gosh, then we have a lot more space internally for you to listen to who maybe you've always been. I think of it more like purpose, like a homecoming. It's not like you make it up and you realize on a mountain who you are. I think it's maybe who you always were, but you for lots of really understandable reasons or issues or just systemic things, you didn't get a chance to get in touch with that. So kind of clearing out and naming what's not true to make space for what's true.
Love it.
Yeah, I like it. And how do your clients usually react when they start to discovering this?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. I think this is such an annoying therapist answer, so I apologize in advance. Well, be as gray as possible. I think it really depends on the client, but sometimes when we're sort of unbecoming old lies, it can feel like waking up from a bad dream. It's like, wait, all that old stuff isn't true, And then sometimes it's people get really excited, and as you can imagine, and start to feel alive. And then sometimes, which is super normal, we overcorrect. Like in the car, if you're driving on the highway and you see something, you overcorrect. It's like when we're practicing boundaries for the first time or discovering who we are, sometimes we overcorrect, and that's just part of the process. And then we kind of come back somewhere that feels a little bit more natural.
One thing that I think happens often also is when you get that awareness, then you realize that now it's your turn to do the work. So sometimes people tend to have excuses for things or blame certain things. But when you realize, okay, so this is the reality. So what am I willing to do now to move forward?
I love that. I love like they then with that knowledge feel empowered, or even like the responsibility. Now that you have the knowledge, the responsibility. What am I going to do? Yeah, totally agree.
So what about boundaries? Like, how do you help your clients create better boundaries? Can you tell a little bit about that?
I mean, I think the first step is starting to hear what you actually think and feel about a situation. You know, that if you're not really tuned in to what crosses your boundaries, it's going to be real hard to set a boundary. You know, so the first part is just saying, well, how did you know, when that person keeps calling me and I obviously don't have time to talk, how do I feel? You know, and then listen to, well, maybe I feel angry, and gosh, anger is a messenger of sorts. You know, it's often a messenger that something is unjust or our boundaries are crossed. And so starting to listen to how they feel first, and then reminding them that boundaries isn't really about the other person. It's going to be normal to worry about their reaction or response, but it's about you. You know, it's about starting to honor what you're hearing you want and need in relationships.
Yeah, definitely. And to be honest, I mean, I work with clients who struggle with that sometimes too. And it's just really doing a lot of education too, like just letting them know, like, okay, so what boundaries do you currently have right now? Do you have like rigid boundaries? Like what kind of, you know, boundaries do you possess, to getting them to where they can have maybe healthier boundaries for themselves, really owning that process. So it is a process indeed, though.
Yeah. I totally agree. Sometimes people fall into sort of really rigid or no boundaries, you know, and it's kind of helping them find that happy middle that can be flexible.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you're treated the way you're allowed to be treated. And if you don't have that awareness about, oh, I'm allowing somebody to cross my boundaries, then how are you going to stop it? So I think that's very important. And also like what you shared earlier about purpose, like understanding the reality and really being intentional and responsible about things. I think they go well together because we do have a responsibility. A lot of times we tend to blame other people for what we go through. But we don't realize that we allow it, whether it's intentionally or not, you know?
Totally. And if you have no boundaries and you're spending all your time taking care of everybody else, it's hard to find your purpose too, you know?
Exactly.
And then you resent everybody else. But so I mean, I think they really, really do go hand in hand.
That is so true. I had a conversation about that the other day, and it's interesting how something that can be your strength, you know, like if you take care of everybody, maybe you're someone that is very caring, right? So you're very caring, so you're taking care of everybody. But then the flip side is that the situation can get out of control, and you don't have any time for yourself, and you get out of balance. So every strength can have like a flip side, and that's also like a piece of awareness. Like, how do you deal with that part so it doesn't get out of control and you lose yourself in the process?
Yeah, I totally agree that like your greatest gifts can become a liability, you know, without some guardrails around them, you know. Yep.
I like that. I like how you frame that, you know, liability. So
yeah.
So let me ask you this though, Monica. I want to go back to something you said earlier as far as like the anxiety. You said you struggle with anxiety for years and things like that. So what are some of the things that you do in your practice to help clients better manage their anxiety to be able to overcome some of the challenges that they have?
Great question. I think one of my favorite things to help clients do is something called, I mean, it's not really a technique, but it's the way I think about it, is name it to tame it. I think it was Dan Siegel that came up with that, but it's just, you know, naming exactly what you're experiencing in order to be able to understand it and dismantle it. If you don't understand why you're anxious or what the anxiety is telling you, you know, it can feel really overwhelming and scary, right? So the first thing is kind of name, well, actually, I'm believing that I'm not worthy, or I'm not lovable. And that's why I'm feeling anxious about this phone call, right? Kind of naming what it is that's feeding it. I would say the other thing is, one of my favorite things is to say with clients is like, I'm not wearing a watch, I'm wearing a bracelet, but if I was wearing a watch, say like right on time, to expect the anxiety, you start to take the power of it, that, it's just an old friend. It's anxiety. It's there, you are separate from the anxiety, but kind of recognizing that it's there, it's going to peak, it's going to go back down, and that starts to take away the power, because so much anxiety is the fear of the anxiety, the fear of the panic attack, right? And if we can just kind of expect it, well then, it's less scary, and I would say one of the other things too is not to feed it. What we feed grows, and what we don't feed starts to shrink. And so kind of learning not to feed the anxiety, which is complex for, depends on what you're dealing with, but to think about it like that.
Wow, no, I like that. And then to kind of just expand on that a little bit, like in these times that we're living in, as far as like COVID and things like that, what are some tips for people who are maybe struggling with being locked down and different things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the biggest thing I would say is not to forget your context. I think that so often when we forget what we're living through right now, which is really crazy on so many levels, when we forget that, we kind of turn on ourselves, like you don't have the energy to maybe exercise like you did, or you don't have the energy to work on a project like you did. And you wonder, well, what's wrong with me? Well, if you forget the context, like nothing's wrong with you. You're just tired, and I think that we go into hyper arousal, like fight or flight. And now a lot of people are in hypo arousal, they're in freeze. A lot of people are running into some serious emotional kind of depressed walls as things don't change. And so I would say the biggest thing is context, and then having compassion for yourself, and remembering that you're not the only one. And that doesn't fix how you're feeling, but we all feel better when we know that we're not the only one experiencing that.
Wow. Wow. No, I like that. And do you find that there's a lot more people coming in for anxiety than ever before, based on how everything's been going?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that everyone I know, myself included, practice is full, and because people are struggling, and I would say that people are struggling with anxiety before that have never even had anxiety before. And then people who have had anxiety might find it peaking at different times unexpectedly, like they thought they had a handle on it, and then it feels like they don't have a handle all of a sudden. So,
And what about depression? Like, do you feel like there is more anxiety now than depression, or is it equal? Like, how is it from your experience?
I would say, my experience being a small slice of, of the world, but I would say at the beginning of the pandemic, there was more anxiety. And I would say now there's more sort of depression. That if I were to kind of generalize it, that's what I would say.
And so obviously one of the things that, I like about what you're doing is that you incorporate social media in what you're doing, and you have a presence, podcasts and things like that. So what's the difference between using like social media as a connection rather than performance?
Yeah, I love that. And that is really my heart behind, using social media at all. I mean, this might reveal a lot about me, but I was not on social media for years. In fact, I just got on Facebook for, the first time in over a decade, because I'm not someone who's naturally into social media, so getting on there was awkward at first. It felt like I felt like a fish out of water. I was like, how do I do this? But now I've come to find that I love it. Like getting to meet you guys. I feel like, I feel like my heart is to make real connections with people, and that social media has really, really been a useful just avenue to do that. I think that it can be so negative, as we all know. Social media can be so destructive for people, but I think it can also be good.
Exactly. No, I agree. I think at the end of the day, it's really how you use it.
Yeah,
Totally.
and I think it's great that you're able to reach more people besides only your clients in Atlanta. Like now you can like reach more people, create more awareness. So be part of that, of normalizing mental health. So
yeah, I love that. Yeah.
Definitely. And so for me, like one of the final questions for me is, so obviously we talk about still becoming, and so what else can we expect from you? Like what else should we be on the lookout for as far as things you may have coming up?
That's a great question. Still writing. I hope to put a book together one day. That's a dream of mine. I've got some children's books in my pocket that I've never created that I would love to put out there. And then I have an offshoot called Still Becoming Kids, and that's kind of like a calming thing for kids that I have one little micro set of episodes, but kind of working more on that. So creating more episodes, more meditations, and more stories, and just, I think, finding a way to hopefully, in a really inclusive way, talk about mental health, talk about wellness, talk about what's important and going on in the world that feels like an invitation and feels healing. Like that's kind of my heart around what I want to keep creating.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I like that. You got some really cool and exciting things coming up. So I'll definitely be checking that out.
Thank you. Me too. And where can someone find you online?
The easiest place is Instagram, because I still haven't really figured out Facebook. So Instagram is just at Monica DiCristina, and there's no H in DiCristina.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Monica, definitely appreciate you taking the time and really coming on here and sharing everything that you did with us. Keep up the good work. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. It really is an honor. It's been fun to connect with you guys, and it's an honor just to share this time with you. So thank you.
Well, there you have it, folks. That's our show for today.
Thanks again for tuning in.
And as always, like it or not, Beard and Curls is the new his and hers.